When I say, hey, kids, keep working on this task, even if you have one answer, keep finding many more. Well, the way we do that online is we duplicate slides in your shared presentation. So my name is on slide 3, and when I've got that answer, I also duplicate it, and I'm now working on slide 4. So it's really the pieces with online and kind of the how do you do it, but that's the same thing you were always doing in the face to face. Once you found one way, you tried another and you just kept it on your paper. The teacher was
Today, we
moving
speak with
around the
Theresa
class.
Wills, the
Now the
author
teacher
of a
is
new book,
moving between
Teaching Math
slides
at a
to see
Distance.
all the different
Theresa is an
strategies that
assistant
students came up
professor
with.
of mathematics of education at George Mason University and a past middle school math teacher.
Stick around to hear how to run math routines online with success, optimal strategies for engaging students online, how we collaborate online in meaningful ways, and how we can use the 5 practices for orchestrating productive mathematical discussions in an online space. And finally, some guidelines for creating rich online interactions in your math class. John, are you ready to hit it off here with Theresa?
Let's do this!
Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr. We are from Make Math Moments, and we're 2 math teachers who together,
with you, the community of math moment makers worldwide who want to build and deliver problem-based math lessons that spark curiosity,
fuel sense making,
and ignite your teacher moves. John, we're going to be hopping into this great discussion with Theresa Wills, and the focus here is going to be all about engaging those learners online. I know we've had tons of people asking us about how we can do this better. I think we've got the antidote here today.
Yeah, and I'm really excited for this. And we were speaking with Theresa in this interview where she talked about writing this book and working on this way before the pandemic hit, and the timing for the resource came out at the right time. So really looking forward to sharing the lessons that she has here for you with you guys. So let's get right to it.
All right, here we go. Hey there, Theresa. Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. It's awesome to have a chance to chat with you. Right now, we're recording this in the evening time. We're wondering, though, how are things going over in your world these days?
Yeah, I'm here. It's evening in Fairfax, Virginia, where I'm located. We're about to get a possible first snow day on Wednesday. So my kids are super excited about that. Not sure how it's going to work in this virtual environment, but stay tuned.
Right. We had kind of a snow day a couple weeks ago, and that's exactly what happened. Everyone's just like, oh, no big deal. We've got this covered. Everyone just go online. And it's something that everyone seems to know what to do now. But I feel like snow days are now a thing of the past, right? It's like everyone's just going to hop online, and we're going to keep that rolling. But Theresa, can you just give us a little bit more backstory? Let our listeners know a little bit more about yourself. What's your role in education? How'd you come to that role? Give us a little story here about your kind of path in the math education world.
Yeah, sure. So started off as a 7th grade math teacher. I still find my home in middle school math. And it wasn't long before I learned about math coaching and really fit well in that position. I still feel like a math coach. Currently, I'm an assistant professor at George Mason University in the Math Education Leadership Department, where we actually graduate folks in the math specialist or math coaching program. And in that position, I get to coach coaches. But I still go into the classrooms, regular K-12 classrooms, and work with teachers shoulder to shoulder. I love the coaching. It's where I feed my soul and be able to kind of show off new innovative things as they come up.
Super cool. Super cool. And, it's pretty awesome that you're in a role of coaching coaches, because I'll be honest and say I've had the awesome experience of being a coach myself. I'm in now we call a district consultant position, which really sort of means it's a bit of everything, a little bit of coaching, a little bit of coaching coaches, a little bit of coordinating, all kinds of things like that. And I'll tell you, becoming a math coach is one of those things that I think people underestimate becoming a coach, because you might be doing some pretty cool things in a math classroom, but as soon as you're kind of thrown into this world of working with other educators, all of a sudden it's like you've got to relearn the game. So the fact that you're diving deep in that area is super, super cool. Theresa, here, as we dive deeper into the episode, we're coming up on a question that folks who listen to the podcast quite a bit know is coming. And it is the question, it is the title of the podcast. And that is where we ask you to describe a memorable math moment from your past. We're curious to hear, when we say math class, what moment pops into your mind from your past that you're willing to share here with the audience?
Yeah, sure. So I was pretty much your average math kiddo, never pushed into accelerated classes or anything, just kind of coasted through. But by the time I hit Algebra 2 in high school, I remember I hit this wall that I just can't memorize anymore. I've always had memorization issues, but at that point I stopped, and it was in conic sections. I don't know if any of y'all remember that
Yeah.
time, but I was talking with my teacher afterwards, and he's like, "You know what you're talking about. Why don't you just do it?" I was like, "I can't remember the formulas." So we were using those TI-83 calculators, and he said, "Why don't you try to learn to program it? You're thinking logically through the steps." So I did. I programmed this cool conic section program. It actually got published on the TI website in the 90s. Super cool. And that's when I realized that, you know what? I'm a logical thinker. I think step by step and I derive. And that's why today, as a mathematician, I still add on my fingers because I trust it. I'm really fast at it and I can derive it every single time.
Is super interesting. And actually, like, kudos to you also getting your program on the TI website. But that's
In the
super
90s, did
slick.
people even know what a website was? Like, not only
Yeah,
were you doing something cool on the TI-83, they're like,
yeah,
"Oh, what's that?" And
for
then you're like, "And it's
sure.
on a website. What's that?" That's, pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool because I was a guru on the not when I was in school, Teresa. It was when I first started teaching. I was like, I'm going to be a master of the TI-83 because when I was in school, they just had got them into my class, and everyone's like, "What are these things?" But awesome stuff. I'm always curious about this is when people share their math moment with us, I'm curious how they think, like, how would you think your math moment has influenced you as the educator you are today?
Oh gosh, that's probably one of those pivotal moments for me because I had a teacher who cared about mathematics and not arithmetic. He really kind of made me think logically about stuff, problem solve, and work through the steps. And I loved the challenge of trying to figure out the line of code that didn't work because that was the line in my logical reasoning that wasn't working. And that's carried me through everything and to the point now where I feel like my niche is math routines and rich tasks and discussion. And it all leads back to that line of code that didn't work. It's the discussion that the pieces that go together. It's not about this quick show and tell. Here's one person's solution, here's another. No, it's this line of code and it stretches out. And if you have a gap, that's where the students have the gap and the connections also. So that experience there leads me to rich tasks and rich discussions and where I am as a math educator now.
I love that. And I think we've talked about it. I like to quote what you described it. Your experience in Algebra 2 is what I call when the wheels fell off for you. And the sad reality is it's because you were driving a vehicle that wasn't really mathematics. For me, it was a little later when the wheels fell off for me. I was in university and I basically could memorize my way through. And I was, I'll call it quote unquote, lucky in the current system or the system that I grew up in anyway, where people said I was good at math, whatever that meant. And we've talked about this at length on the podcast. And that experience, I would argue, is the experience that so many students have, but it just happens at different points. You know, some students it's in grade 1, some students it's in grade 7, others in algebra 2, others in wherever it is along the way. If we're not truly engaging in mathematics, where we're just memorizing formulas, then those wheels will inevitably fall off for people. So I really, every time I hear someone share a story similar to that, it makes me feel like we're making moves in the right direction. So I'm wondering, listening to clearly this experience for you going back, and I'm picturing you're saying like that one line of code that didn't work, like that's where I think the true learning is, right? It's like that's the part that you remember. You don't remember all the things that were just sort of routine. You weren't thinking about them at all. They just were automatic. But that line of code that sort of breaks down where you have to really think and really work your way through and try to figure things out, reason all the way through. I'm wondering, what did your early self look like and sound like in the classroom? Because for me, I'm describing these wheels falling off for myself, and I didn't realize it when I first started teaching. So I continued to teach that way. I continued to promote students memorizing steps and procedures, and I pre-taught everything. There was no such thing as a rich task in my early classroom. It was all just me telling. So I'm wondering, like, what did your early self look like? Did this have an influence on you right away? Or was it something that you came to realize over time about your past and connect the dots a little later? We're always curious to see what that might look like, sound like, how your early self might maybe differ, or is it similar to the way you approach things now?
I was very, very fortunate my first year teaching. I had a math coach who cared. And I remember it was October when I hit October, my first year teaching, when I hit this moment of realizing that teaching the step by step, because, I was like, great, I can code. I can teach step one, do this, step two, do this, step three, do this. And that's when she said, that's where I get this phrase that I use all the time now. Are you teaching them arithmetic or are you teaching them mathematics? And while that might seem like the same word to so many people, what I see the difference is like what a computer can chug and do versus what somebody can teach, what somebody can problem solve or write the code. And so I keep coming back to coding, but that's the way that I see my world is a variety of steps. But what I've learned through coaching is it's not about telling somebody those steps. It's about being there when the wheels fall off and celebrating that moment and saying, okay, now is where we get to actually problem solve. Let's get dirty. Let's think about this. Let's figure out what's happening. But it was in October of my first year teaching that that happened. And then for the next couple years, I was kind of a hot mess of inspiration and innovation. I always wanted to try something new, but I definitely didn't plan out. I didn't anticipate things the way that I do these days, but that's kind of part of that passion and excitement and early teaching. And then I started to realize the importance of taking your time, doing the math beforehand, and all those things that we talk with teachers about these days. But yeah, early on, there's so much power in math coaches. My first math coach had an amazing impact on me, and I like to be there when teachers feel those wheels falling off and celebrate them. And
Awesome. Awesome stuff. It is great that you had the math coach because I reflect back on my first years and I didn't have a math coach. It was like what Kyle said. I remember teaching the way that I was taught. And I think you're so right. So much of math teaching for certain people is still very robotic and a computer could do it. And it's really the problem solving behind it, but not necessarily the problem solving of teaching kids how to problem solve. But like you said, it's the problem solving of like, and I'm going to use your phrase here, like that missing line of code. It's like, what is about this lesson that didn't work today? And it's that part we can't replicate. We can't train a computer to teach our math lessons the way that I had done it. And we could probably train a teacher to do it the way I had done it, but no one could really train someone to say, what are the ins and outs of what's happening in the classroom, the dynamics, and how do I treat these kids so they're human beings? Like, there's so much to go into teaching. And I think you've articulated some great points there.
you actually bring up a really good point about that when we're not teaching robotically, when we are teaching the problem solving and finding those moments. I got to tell you, in this world of virtual learning, that is what makes teachers so amazing. You cannot replace a teacher, even in the virtual setting. You can't just throw up a YouTube and say, hey, watch this, learn the stuff. And what you're talking about there is all the things that teachers do. That's that extra bit. That's not just the robotic part.
Yeah. When you brought up the YouTube example there, that was a common, I think, thing that some math teachers had done maybe 10 years ago that, hey, we're going to teach 21st century learning and we're going to teach kids how to learn on their own. But that really, from when I saw a lot of teachers trying that, it translated into everything you want to learn is on the internet. Turn to the internet and just ask it and it will tell you. And it was like, and there I was like,
Ah, but
wait,
what do you ask
wait,
it?
yeah,
Yes,
that
exactly.
but that is like, what about that is sparking like curiosity in students. It was this, I'm going to just ask a computer and then it's just going to give me a video to learn. And I was like, no, we have to do so much more in mathematics to drive learning and spark curiosity and build wonder in what we're learning. So there's definitely lots to becoming a teacher and being a teacher. And you've got your hands full as being a coach of coaches. So you've got lots to work with. If we turn our attention to your book, because I know that we wanted to definitely chat about your book, and we've seen more and more of your work as many districts around the world are turning to remote learning during the pandemic. Kyle's school board at the time of this recording just went completely online in his area again, kind of back to lockdown, just like we were in the spring. But the timing of the book, Teaching Math at a Distance, seems perfect, given our challenges right now. I'm wondering, like, was this something like you've been cooking up, or was this like COVID-19 is here? I want to address this right away. And the book was created in lightning flash speed because books
She
sometimes
could
take a
sense a
while.
pandemic was coming.
Yeah.
Good.
What inspired you to write it? Like, give us a little bit of backstory on the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So, gosh, this book has been in the works of my brain for quite a while. I've been teaching online in this way that so many people are just discovering for a decade. I've been trying to promote it to anybody who listens, but in a field where the audience isn't there, it's really tough to be able to talk about your work. And so there's plenty of online learning, but what I was trying to say is, let's do not only the things we're doing in the face-to-face classroom, let's do those same things online and try and give more access to students. So I'm talking engagement, participation, student voice, interactions, small groups, rich tasks, math routines, all those things, but not in a prescribed watch this video, this one. We are live, we're in real time, we're talking to one another, and we're seeing the mathematics appear on the screen, much like I would see on a student's paper. So that was the message I was trying to get out. And where I was working with schools or even universities to talk about this, there wasn't quite the need. As soon as the pandemic hit the United States, unfortunately, there was a need. And beginning March 12th is when everything hit for me. I felt this responsibility. People were saying, "Hey, how do you do that?" A couple moms were asking me on the playground, and I was like, "Oh, this is how you do it." And they're like, "Whoa, you should tell somebody." And so at that point, I started conducting a free 1 hour PD every single day from March 12th to mid August. Over 170 hours of free PD later, there was this network of teachers that said, "Hey, you know what? I think we know how to do this. Let's try and do this." And then it wasn't shortly after the spring that Aaron Null from Corwin Mathematics reached out to me and said, "I think you have a message to say." And I said, "Yep, I think I do." And it was amazing because for someone who doesn't consider themselves a writer, the ideas just poured out at lightning speed like they've been inside for 10 years in the making.
Wow. Yeah, that is incredible. And like you said, I mean, obviously such a crazy time that we find ourselves in. And at the end of the day, you had something that you could share to help people through this really difficult time. So I'm sure there's so many educators out there and those who are maybe hearing about you for the first time through this episode. Hopefully they will go check out Teaching Math at a Distance or checking out your website. And I'm wondering if we can dive into some of these things, because as you had mentioned, it's like, no, like we're not going to do online learning differently. And I think that's something that can be really hard for people to get over. Like we already addressed the YouTube idea. Okay, I could go, and there are people out there. I'm not going to lie. I've done some YouTube videos over the years where I've got thousands of views. Like someone wants to learn how to do these things. So they're timely and they're helpful for some people. But I really wouldn't advocate that be their first experience with the idea, right? Like we want to introduce concepts in mathematics through exploration and investigation, and we want to pique their curiosity. And what I'm hearing from your work and even on your website, there's so many different resources for educators to gain some access to. So maybe we can chat a little bit about some math routines, because I know there's a lot of people listening that might be doing online learning, but maybe are resorting to more, we'll call it asynchronous approaches, maybe based on like, I'm not sure how to engage my class in a discussion, like in a rich task together. I'm wondering, like, do you have any sort of routines that you'd be able to share with folks, or any maybe getting started tips for someone who's either new to this online thing or maybe is not feeling super confident with leading a synchronous session? Is there anything that you would say to them to help them sort of rip the Band-Aid off and get going with some of these more synchronous and engaging routines that they might be using face to face?
Absolutely. We talked about the power of math coaches early on, and this comes right out of the coaching textbook for me. Math routines, in other words, 7-minute warm ups that you do every single day, are kind of, in my opinion, this gateway into transitioning from teacher directed to student led. And in 7 minutes, I can work shoulder to shoulder or virtual screen to screen with teachers, and we can implement a math routine. These routines, I don't try and recreate the wheel. Things like which one doesn't belong, would you rather. There's so many great ones out there. What I try and do is showcase how to do this in a virtual environment. So I'll work with a teacher working on warm-ups and routines, and that's usually just enough to say, "Oh, wow. All right, I got this. I'm ready for the rich task. I'm ready to plunge in for more." But specifically, what structures do you use with the routines? I tried to list out on my website. I've got so many routines and the structures that go along with it. But I have a very different lens that I look at this with. I don't try and say, when you do this routine, this is the structure you use. Because the one thing I learned when raising my first kiddo is that everyone's got advice, but nothing ever works for your own kid. And that's probably the same case for your classroom. So instead, I'm very purposeful about it. When I do which one doesn't belong, I want first to do a visual. Then I want to know their rationale. Then I want them to have accountability. So one, I can grade. Two, I know if they're there. And three, I can put an idea to a student name. So, what I try to do on the website in my PDs here is talk about a routine and the purposeful steps you could choose to take so that when you're ready to implement it, you can either choose my recipe or you can grab a couple ideas from other ones and put them together into your own, something that works for your own classroom. But we started off with coaching and we're going to end with coaching. It all comes into purposeful planning, and math routines are a great gateway to get into that purposeful planning for student led instruction.
I'm curious about your structure. You said you wanted every task, so it didn't matter if it was like which one doesn't belong, or would you rather, or maybe it was an estimation problem. But you said every single one of those you're trying to put into this structure, which was it's visual, get a rationale, have some accountability. And I think I missed the last one.
Those are just 3, there's so many. There's some routines such as how do you get every kid to participate? And there's little strategies I'll do in there, including using something as simple as the emojis in a chat box, or having every kid raise their hand before we start calling on some students. And so if you tinker around and look through some of the different routines, you'll see these kind of hidden pieces of, oh, this is specific to online learning. When I say, hey, kids, keep working on this task, even if you have one answer, keep finding many more. Well, the way we do that online is we duplicate slides in your shared presentation. So my name is on slide 3, and when I've got that answer, I also duplicate it, and I'm now working on slide 4. With my original work on slide 3, new work on slide 4. When I finish that, I make a duplicate for slide 5. So it's really the pieces with online and kind of the how do you do it, but that's the same thing you were always doing in the face to face. Once you found one way, you tried another and you just kept it on your paper. The teacher was moving around the class. Now the teacher is moving between slides to see all the different strategies that students came up with.
Got it. So I'm just as a teacher who's listening here and trying to piece this together in their classroom. Like I know that lots of us have had experience trying this in our own virtual room because we almost all had to. But let's say the teacher's listening right now and they're like, I want to go tomorrow and I want to try this in my virtual classroom. What are some good tips or maybe like a specific example you could share with us that might make the light bulb go off and go, that's what I've been doing wrong this time. This is what I'm going to change. And it's because Teresa showed me an example of what to do.
Sure. I think probably the easiest way of getting more student participation, getting more student voice, is releasing ownership. And that's kind of scary for some of us. It was scary for me the first time I did it. I use Google Slides as a platform because I can hit share and everyone can edit it at the same time. But gosh, it's a little scary to think that all 32 of my students are going to be editing the slides at the same time. So there's a little structure that I might put up there at first. It might just be that I share it for the 7-minute warm up and we see how it goes. But what's happening there when we kind of give up this ownership is they're the ones who are now leading the math lesson. They're the ones who are putting their work on. It's less control for us, but also less of us telling and more of them showing. And so that kind of first step is checking out. I've got templates. It seems like everyone is making their own templates for Google Slides, but the important thing is share them in an editable way. Don't be the owner and the only one writing on it. Make sure that your students are the ones doing it. And oh, yeah, there'll be lots of mistakes early on. Celebrate them, talk about them, and do short little spurts so the students can get used to those.
I love it. I love it. And it's such an important message as well. Like, so often I'm chatting with teachers in math, it just seems like everything is. It's almost like students are trained at such a young age to not have any mistakes on their math paper, right? Like they don't want to have eraser marks or they don't want to have to redo something. So they oftentimes sit and wait when in reality, it should be quite the opposite. It should be, it's brainstorming, it's messy, it's experimentation, it's scribbling on the page. And obviously, in the digital world, we should be obviously honoring that even more so, just simply because it's so easy to copy those slides and to move something around and to fix mistakes as we go and when we notice them as students and as learners. So super cool. Now, I'm wondering, if I was to go to your book, okay, so first of all, I think your book is super attractive. People want to read it because they're like, wow, I'm in this online environment. But I'm wondering from you, from the author's perspective, sometimes there's like a nugget in there, there's a section in there that sort of, it's a place held deep or close to your heart. What would that section of your book be if someone was to pick up the book and look at it? What section is that little section, that little nugget that you think, wow, I wish more people would pay more attention to this part?
Oh gosh, that would go to my favorite mathematician, math educators out there. You may have heard of the lovely book, The Five Practices, Peg Smith, Mary Kay Stein's work. So they have completely inspired me. Everything from my early work to my dissertation to where we are here. There is something amazing when you can give a rich task, put students of all ages, I'm talking first graders all the way through in-service teachers, put people in small groups and letting them dive into this rich math. Online, there's so many more representations that you can do that I couldn't even do in the face-to-face classroom. And not only that, but every single student is immediately writing, drawing, or pasting onto that slide. So there's not like one leader in the small group, it's everyone is contributing. But what I love about the five practices is how well it works online. So what this is essentially is you give a rich task. You anticipate early on what are all the different ways students could solve this. You go in, you give the task to the kiddos. You select just a couple ones that you're going to present. So I'm going to copy this one representation on slide 5, copy this one representation on slide 9, and this one on slide 10. And I bring it down to my own slide. Then I'm asking students to make connections between those. Earlier, I talked about that missing line of code, and I think this is why I make such a connection here with Smith and Stein's work in the five practices, because it's the conversation that happens after they had a chance to dig into the mathematics. And when we see these different representations and how they build upon each other to really unpack the understanding of what's happening there, I see the same connection to making sure I don't have a missing line of code, making sure I don't have a missing representation, but also since the students are the ones that supplied all those representations, it's just a feast for me to go out there and be like, oh, I want a little bit of this, I want a little bit of that, I want a little bit of this. And my job is easy because there's so many opportunities for representations. That's my favorite stuff. That's my work. That's where I'm constantly trying to improve on and teach more of. It's all about the many representations and how it connects to rich tasks in the five practices.
Yeah, the five practices is a huge influence in our work, and we've chatted with Peg a number of times here on the pod, like actually not all here on the podcast, but she's presented in our virtual summit, I think both years as well. And her work and Mary Kay Stein's work is definitely influential and has changed the way we've taught, because at no time in my past teaching self was I a person who would have thought that there was multiple ways to represent, say, solving an equation or a linear relation rate of change. I would have just shown kids how to do it instead of seeing like what emerges and then trying to connect it together, which, like you've said, is the missing line of code. So, yeah, totally great section there. I think people should be checking out. I have one more, I think, wonder that I think many teachers who are in a remote space are wondering about or worrying about. It goes to the fact that lots of teachers who have changed their classrooms to be more collaborative and more engaging in class for discussion, they've had group work or collaboration work. And I think when they go to online, they're just like, I don't know what to do. I think that's one of the most common questions Kyle and I have had since March when all of this went down, because we also held weekly coaching sessions online for our academy members. And that was the most common question we had was like, how do I now do that like great group work? Like, how do I get collaboration out of this when all of a sudden we're all at home in our own homes and we're all online? And like, what are our best practices for group work? Theresa, what would you say to them? What there were some good practices you've come across for group work?
So much of what we do online is exactly what we do in the face-to-face classroom. We just need to consider and anticipate things a little differently. So let me kind of walk you through this. I want to have a lot of collaboration. I want students to talk when they're in small groups. I want them to put representations on the slide. I want them to compare to each other, all these wonderful things. I wanted that in the face-to-face also. But I didn't just start on day one and say, all right, folks, four in a group, have this rich talk. It didn't happen. I had to scaffold this and kind of do this gradual release in my face to face classroom. Some of this gradual release I learned from kindergarten teachers who, in my opinion, are just the best teachers in the world because they can somehow or another get kiddos to walk down the hall without licking the wall through
Hmm.
a series of songs and routines. And
Usually,
so,
not always.
right. So these same songs and routines, we use them in the virtual space. So if I'm trying to come up with collaboration, I'm going to start with a pair share. Two kids in a group for 2 minutes, and we're going to talk about something simple like what do you like on your tacos and how many days a week do you want them? There's many right answers to it. It's going to help conversation flow. And then when students have met my prerequisites, things like everyone's using the microphone, they're taking turns. Once they've met whatever I've said as my prerequisites, then I can go into the next step. Like, hey, how about four kids to a group? We do a math task that is pretty easy. There's multiple right answers, but I'm feeling like everyone's going to be successful. So the risk factor isn't there, but the math is, and we're still practicing some of those things that I consider prerequisites to get to the meat of the collaboration. Once kids are showing that they can give equitable talk time, they're interested in diverse opinions, and they value multiple representations, then I know, hey, I can have a group of four or more for 20 minutes in a breakout room. And I know they're going to collaborate because I've been watching them on all these little gradual release steps on the way up to it. So, yeah, teaching virtually, there's so many of the same things that I've learned from face to face, and that's anticipating what students are going to do, anticipating the needs that they have. How do I not be scared of a microphone? Okay, let's think about that one. Kind of writing those out in steps and then slowly moving through those steps so students can get to the place you want them to be.
I love it. I love it. And there's so many key points there that I heard come through, and I'll kind of address them. I'll try in the same order, but when you think about going online, especially if you're let's say a middle school teacher, we'll use Teresa, your experience being middle school in the classroom. And there's so many things we take for granted when students come into our classroom because they were in the previous grade. If I'm teaching grade 7, well, they were in grade 6. Things aren't that different. Of course, in your classroom, things might run a little differently, right? And you're going to try to scaffold and you're going to try to do some gradual release sort of things to lead up to the routine you're looking for, but it's not brand new. That's one of the pieces that I think has been so challenging for so many educators is that we get thrown into this online world and it's so easy to forget that this is brand new for everyone, not just the teacher, but also the students. So some things that might seem obvious to us are not obvious at all. Today, as I mentioned, my son and my daughter were online for the first time. And early in the lesson, I hear Landon yell out, "Oh my gosh, there's thousands of fish." And I'm like, "Oh, that's kind of cute." But then I hear his teacher, "Oh, that's great, Landon. But during silent reading time, make sure to mute your mic." So, like, I'm laughing, giggling to myself because this is brand new for him. He's in grade one. And I think having those ideas in mind and thinking about how do we create this environment. And John and I like to say, like, how do we start off the school year without a hitch? And we talk about that in a regular classroom. And we've also talked about it in the online environment. And in the online environment, it's like you have to back up so much further in order to get some of those routines going. But as you had mentioned, whether it's anticipating for a task or anticipating what are students going to do when I try to get them to engage in some sort of collaborative activity or some sort of online space that you're trying to get them to work in. These are all things that we have to think through and remember. And it's hard work, but it's so worth it in the end. It becomes so much easier as we go. So I'm seeing so many great things here. We're looking at the time. We don't want to hold you the entire evening. So we want to flip it back to you. I know you've got some awesome goodies for folks, not only your book, so you can mention the title of that book again, but also I know that you've got some other really cool professional learning opportunities for educators that I'm sure you'd be willing to share if we ask you to. So go ahead there, Theresa. How can Math Moment Makers learn more about you and get better at this thing we call math teaching, be it online or even face to face?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, the book title is Teaching Math at a Distance, a Practical Guide to Rich Remote Instruction. I have a website, theresawills.com, and I try to keep a lot of video of what the classroom might look like. Every professional development I do, I record and pop it up there in its raw form. So you're not going to get something that's all polished and looking intimidating. You're going to get exactly what it is. I also hold a workshop every single Saturday at noon Eastern. You can go to theresawills.com/matherdays. And what I do in that 1 hour is I try to model what a 1 hour classroom block of math would look like. A few minutes building a community, a few minutes working on a math routine. We jump into a rich task. We have this discussion afterwards. And then I do a little Q&A for teachers who want to stay afterwards and learn how to anything from make the slides or not have to recreate the slides or just it tips on that. But yeah, I've got over 25 of those already on my website. So if you want to see some math tasks, how they work online, which virtual manipulatives to choose, and more, the tasks are from kindergarten through calculus. I've taught everything, so I try to include tasks that have a wide range. And yeah, I do that every Saturday. It's how I feed my soul. And you mentioned what's one other thing for educators. And I do have one piece of advice, and that is to give yourself grace. And I say that not because I want to be nice, although I kind of think I'm nice, but because it's important for students. And this is one of the best things you can do to teach. Because when you give yourself grace and you practice how you react to your own mistakes, and when you mess up, you don't apologize. Instead, you showcase it to your students. You're showing them and you're modeling to them how they should deal with mistakes, how they should persist through productive struggle. You're teaching them how to problem solve. And what better time is there to do it right now when you're likely to make a mistake online? So, if there's one message I hope to get out there, it's make your mistakes, don't apologize, celebrate them, and show students that that's what mathematicians do.
Awesome stuff. Those are some great takeaways and last messages for our audience. So well, we won't add any more to that because it's good stuff. Thanks so much, Theresa, for taking time out of your busy schedule to hang out with the Math Moment Maker community. We definitely appreciate you and appreciate the time that you are dedicating to helping teachers navigate this online learning space. So thanks so much. And we look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Theresa. See you soon. Well, as always, it is so awesome to welcome great influencers from the math education space onto the show. And this time with Theresa Wills, it was no exception. I know we took away some good nuggets for the next time you're teaching online. Maybe you're back to a face-to-face environment right now, but let's be honest, who knows what the future holds? So having these different pedagogical strategies in our back pocket, I think, is really a huge asset for us all moving forward. What do you think, John?
I think totally with that. The lessons here can help not only now, but also come the new school year, and also for lots of different reasons other than just remote learning. So super excited that we got to share that with you and the Math Moment Maker community.
Awesome stuff. In order to ensure you don't miss out on new episodes as they come out each week, be sure to smash that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts and any of your other favorite podcasting platforms.
Also, if you're liking what you're hearing, please share the podcast with a colleague and help us reach a wider audience by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and tweeting us at Make Math Moments on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
As always, show notes and links to resources from this episode and all of our other episodes can be found on our website. But for today's, it's at makemathmoments.com/episode 131. John, it's getting hard to share this link because the numbers are getting so high. We are flying through episodes here. Remember, head on over to makemathmoments.com/episode 131.
We release a new episode every Monday morning, so keep an eye out for our next episode.
Well, Math Moment Makers, until next time, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And a high five for you.